Welcome to my office. Okay, today we're discussing Kingsman. Um, Not that movie, not this one, not all of this. But Kingsman has a reference to an attitude that our parents had towards power and politics, and why some of the criticism coming from the West is not so much warranted when it comes to the slow progress of democracy in Africa as a whole. So let's start with a small analogy, right? And those who are the teachers among us are probably going to relate a bit. If you have learned to drive and you know quite well how to drive, and all of a sudden you are asked to teach somebody else to drive, you can usually get really frustrated about why are they not getting this faster, or why is it taking them so long. In another sense also, when you are being taught a particular concept, whether it's mathematics or even programming or economics, whatever it is, you really have like a very difficult attitude about someone just getting into the bulk of it. So, and I think this is where the basis of my argument will be, right? It is as simple as follows. The big bulk of the African population doesn't know what democracy is. Simple as that. Now, let's go back a bit in history, right? And I'll take 3 countries as a baseline. So, you have France, Germany, and the US that I'm going to use. All of these countries were at some point or another were a colony or a monarchy. They had king and queens or a substitute to the king, but in essence, the people were not accountable or were not getting any accountability from the people directing their life, right? Now, let's start with France. France became a democracy after a violent revolution that went from 1789 to 1799. So it was very hard, the French Revolution. You probably heard about it from one way or the other. But the outcome is that they got rid of the monarchy and then they installed a secular democratic republic. Germany, I love them. And sometimes I like to compare them as the dwarf in all the fantasy novel that I've read. Like they're very good with craftsmanship, and anyway, you get the idea. So Germany, it's a bit of a mixed bag, right? So they kind of united while divided, in a sense. Exactly like all the Dwarvish kingdom that you've probably seen in whether the Lord of the Ring or the Hobbit or Piccini. They usually have that same thing, right? Now, before World War II, before World War I, sorry, they had what they call a Kaiser, which was in essence a king, and then got replaced by a president a little bit afterwards. Yes, Germany has a president, but the role of the president is more or less ceremonial at this point because the chancellor, in essence, holds all the executive power. So, after all that turmoil, World War I, World War II, which was in essence led by a dictator, the most popular one in modern history, I'm not going to say it, but after all of that, they woke up and then they became the 3rd biggest economy in the world while still being democratic. The US, most probably the most famous democracy in the world, arose from being a British colony, and they had to go through a revolution between 1765 and 1783. You see, like a kind of not far off from the French Revolution, and during that they became what we know as the USA now. And now the democratic election is probably the most mediatic event every political mediatic event every 4 years or so. So now we have all of these countries that have been democracies for close to 2 centuries, and some of them just about once a century. So they have been practicing that a lot. So we have them, and then we have to think about, okay, where is Africa coming from? In the 18th centuries, most African um, regions were composed of village state or empires, or that you can go back in history and then find most about it. But in essence, they had a king or someone that was having the central power. Right? So then came the period of colonial powers, where all of these kings, in essence, kind of lost their power or were replacement for the colonial power, like a sort of a bridge between the colonial power and then the population. But then that still means that, in essence, the kingship was just replaced from the king to the colonial power. So really nothing changed. So the people were still having a master that they have to answer to. So through then the advent of World War I and then World War II, most African countries started to realize that, well, the colonial power is not what it was. So we had then what became like the liberation movement in many African countries. So for the outcome of that liberation movement from the 60s to the 70s, almost every country in Africa became independent. I'm saying independent, not democratic, independent. The colonial power was gone, but then they became democratic, kinda. So, what I mean is, most countries in Africa were led by the liberation movement that got rid of the colonial power. And most of those liberation organizations became what became the next government. And for a big part between the 70s until the 90s, most of these countries were only proposing one choice to the population. So the liberation movement became political parties, and then when people had to go to ballot, they only had a choice for that one. During the 90s, there was also another fight. People were asking to have multiple options, and most of those liberation movement they caved, and then they allowed other political organizations to flourish. So then we come into a part where we now have many political parties, but as the situation changed. So in essence, we can say probably, but if we see what we have now, most of those countries are still led by the party that gave them independence, and the person which was leading that liberation movement, it's most likely still be the person which is in charge of the country. So if I'm recapping myself at this point, in centuries, African masses were led by kings. Then came the colonial powers, and then they became colonies, and then the kingship just switched from proper king to colonial masters. Then the liberation movement came, and then they removed the colonial masters, and then they were replaced by political masters or strong men. So you still have that political elite of the Mugabes or whatever, which in a sense is still, well, the king and the court. So all of them were just replaced, name change, but in essence we still have the same paradigm. Now that means many Africans have never really experienced what true democracy is, and they are still learning. Even in country where it seems to be in essence still kind of democratic, it is still a learning process. So to put things in perspective, I'm not that old, but when my father was born, my country of origin was not yet independent, and my father is still not that old. When I was born, my country only had one party that you could select at the election. When I became a young boy, the country where I live right now had its first democratic election. And I had to become a postgraduate student before Tunisia had its first free democratic election. So all of this, that was just yesterday. It's not as if it was decades and decades ago. It was yesterday. So most African countries are just learning about what is that thing that we call democracy. And in my perspective, Africa is learning fast. So this video is, in a sense, is not to bash most African countries, but it's a sort of a praise from where we were and the progress that we have to make to be where we are at right now. So then it's a compared to my generation to start now adding a bit of the voice into what needs to happen next, because the old ones are going to leave, and then when they leave, we shouldn't plunge into chaos. Next time I'm going to cover what are the factors that could lead to a proper democratic republic. See you next time.